So welcome everyone, marhaba, shalom aloha, thank you for coming to this lightning talk on how modern slavery manifests on social media. For those who didn't hear me introduce myself before, my name is Bernadette Judo. I am a research and policy specialist at Walk Free. I'm based in Western Australia and my research focuses regionally on the Arab states and thematically on women and girls. And it really is an honour to be able to speak to this community at Bread and Net about how our emerging research on how modern slavery is happening online is beginning to take shape. And before I begin again, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I am coming to you from, and that is the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I acknowledge their leaders past, present and emerging. So, for those of you who have not heard of Walk Free, we're an international human rights group based in Perth, focused on the eradication of modern slavery in all of its forms. We are also the authors of the Global Slavery Index and the co-authors of the Global Estimates of Modern Slavery, a study that we produced together with the International Labour Office and the International Office for Migration. We released an update to the Global Estimates of Modern Slavery earlier this year, and we found that there are 49.7 million people living today in situations of modern slavery around the world. So, what is modern slavery? Essentially, it is an umbrella term which covers the worst forms of exploitation, from slavery, slavery-like practices, to forced labour, human trafficking and forced marriage, among other forms. And the essential characteristic of these largely overlapping definitions is that they cover a situation that a person cannot escape. And so I won't spend too much time diving into these definitions, but I'm happy to reach out and discuss this in more detail if anyone has any questions offline. But so together with academic stakeholders, we were really interested in understanding how modern slavery in all these various forms is occurring on social media. And so we approached this global research with two broad questions. Firstly, is social media facilitating exploitation? And is it a place where survivors are present and seeking help, or is it more towards traffickers? And so what we have seen so far, based on our own research and on a review of the growing body of evidence from many other authors looking into similar questions, is that it's actually both of these things. It's both a place and means to facilitate exploitation and a place for survivors to seek help and build communities. So in terms of survivors are using social media to create communities and networks. They're using it to seek help and warning others of the risks. And this is an example on the left of an article that was released in 2021, where the journalist found many examples of domestic workers talking about their experiences and how they were, their negative experiences working in the Gulf. But so at the same time, and in a more immediately recognizable way, social media is a place that people are put at risk of exploitation, as traffickers are using the same applications we all are. And some of the things that we've identified from the literature and from our ongoing research is that traffickers are using fake job ads to lure people. Fraudulent recruiters advertise people for hire to potential employers. There are also other forms of modern slavery happening online, like babies are being sold through alleged adoption processes, and the live streaming of child sex abuse is also getting more and more of an issue, particularly in the aftermath of the pandemic. Now, these are just a very small snapshot of how risk is present online. We are currently systematically reviewing major platforms to understand how all the various forms of modern slavery in as many sectors as we can try and pinpoint is still occurring. So, how this becomes more relevant to the countries I research, being Lebanon, Jordan, and countries in the Gulf, is that these countries have high populations of migrant workers and a sponsorship system that places them at immense risk of exploitation. And this is, of course, the kafala system. And just for clarity's sake, kafala itself is not a form of modern slavery. It is a system that creates an immense power imbalance that can create an environment that allows modern slavery to thrive. And kafala itself just refers to a set of laws and policies that are the rules around how a migrant can enter, reside, work in, and ultimately exit countries like Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and of course, Lebanon. It is a form of a tied visa program, and there are many different tied visa programs around the world. But again, what makes Kafala so important is the high number of migrant workers coming into the region. So how does it intersect with modern slavery on social media? So far, we've seen to date many risky recruitment ads trying to get people to apply for jobs, risky recruiters offering the migrant workers then, and largely here I'm talking about domestic workers, for hire to potential employers, and in some cases the direct sale of domestic workers, including on community buy and sell pages. But as has been recently reported in the New York Times and by the Fuller Project, domestic workers in some Gulf countries are also active online. They are very active in building communities and sharing about their working lives, and not all of them are in situations of exploitation, but where they are providing support to one another, warning one another about the risks, and also seeking help where it's required. And so I thought I would contextualize this with a case study. This is Maria's story. Her name has been changed for her safety. Marie migrated to Kuwait from the Philippines to work and support her family back home. She was a domestic worker, and although her employer never gave her a day off, she thought he was by and large a decent one. But when her contract neared its end, 2 years, her employer started to take photos of her, and she was confused by this, but didn't feel safe enough to ask why he was doing that. Her photos were subsequently used to advertise her on social media, where a man bought her from her old employer via an encrypted messaging service for about 1,500 Kuwaiti dinar, or about 5,000 USD. United States dollars. She was traded to her new employer at a gas station and did not understand what had happened. And so in her words, as you can see on the screen and here as well, she said, "I wanted to ask my previous employer why. I was sold like an object without hesitation. I never thought that there were people who can sell a human like an object over the internet." So we know that after that modern slavery risks are present online. Both survivors and traffickers are using the same platforms. And so we wanted to know, what are the platforms themselves doing to reduce risks? So we did some more research, and in consultation with digital rights groups and trafficking experts, we've developed a set of sector-specific metrics to analyse how social media companies are disclosing in their mandatory disclosures as required under the Modern Slavery Acts in Australia and in the United Kingdom. And we were analysing these disclosures to understand and identify how they were reducing risks. And after identifying a series of platforms which met our definition of what a social media company is, and that was oddly difficult to do, and then identifying those which were required to report under the Acts, we analysed the statements made by 7 companies covering 9 platforms, and we found that not one of them is doing enough. As measured by the metrics we developed together with experts, none of them are doing enough to address risks of modern slavery on their platforms. And in reviewing the statements, we realised that many of the companies were reporting on their risks in their direct supply chains. So who was providing them with their computers, with their office space, their direct workers, rather than disclosing fulsome detail about what they are doing to identify and address risks on their platforms for end users. And I just want to flag here that a more detailed examination of social media companies' responses to modern slavery, or the lack thereof, will be included in the forthcoming Global Slavery Index, which is due for release early in 2023. So please do look out for that report when it's available. It will be our 5th edition of the Global Slavery Index. But what I can say now, before that report is released, is this: fewer than half of the companies had any kind of policy that was specific to modern slavery, which was public. Fewer than half used a specific resource to detect modern slavery, including specific workers or having a tool. And fewer than half cooperated with law enforcement or removed, wherever it was relevant, violating accounts. Almost none of them screened for indicators of modern slavery, meaning that by and large, responses to modern slavery are reactive rather than proactive. And ultimately, although there is some positive things that we identified being that some of them did work with other stakeholders in the industry to raise standards. Ultimately, no reported action to date has been comprehensive enough or sufficient to reduce risks across their platforms. So we then developed a set of recommendations, which what you might like to know, to understand better what governments and platforms themselves can do to make social media safer. And for the platforms, we think that they honestly require more transparency. So they need to publish clear public policies about all forms of modern slavery, including in their community guidelines. And they need to allow the public to be able to report posts for being risky in this way. They also, again, must transparently report on what they're finding and what they're doing when they find a risky post. Finally, well, thirdly, they must provide effective remediation beyond just taking content down. For example, removing violating accounts, but also working with law enforcement, labour inspectors, civil society, linking victims to support services, and also providing disaggregated data on the types of content that they are moderating. And as I mentioned, they should move from being reactive to proactive in reducing risks. And this could include developing clear guidelines on detecting, preventing, and remediating modern slavery risks across their entire value chain. And finally, we're very concerned that if one single platform takes action, it will simply displace risk to another. And that is something we'd like to avoid, and consider that collaborating with other platforms and their peers is an essential part of making the digital space safer for all. And then for governments, there are clear gaps in existing legislation which need to be filled, such as strengthening the Modern Slavery Acts and the mandatory human rights due diligence laws to ensure that social media companies are required to report about their platform and their impact on end users. Governments also similarly must work together. This is a problem that transcends national borders and can facilitate cross-border trafficking, and so should be treated as other transnational crimes. Their policies and actions also must be made in consultation with survivors and experts on digital rights and should be informed by their expertise. And this will help avoid the unintended consequences of some legislation, as we have seen happen previously with the Foster-Sester Act in the United States. All these policy outcomes must protect people and not expose them to different risks. But there is also things that users can do, and that's largely just to be aware of what the risks are at this stage, particularly when searching for a job online. So we've posted some of these red flags to our Instagram account. Please be sure to read the post and share with your network as you see fit. And we derived this list of indicators and red flags from existing literature and our ongoing research. So it may be subject to some more refinement as our research continues. But effectively, what we're seeing as red flags is when the job seems too good to pass up. So there is high pay, limited to no experience required. Everything is taken care of for the job seeker. There's free visas, free flights. The job itself isn't described in much detail. It can be vague, could only be something as like a helper. And importantly, when the contact is moved into an encrypted messaging service, that seems to be another area of risk. And in terms of other trends, other things we've identified to date are traffickers are reaching out to vulnerable users or luring them in with posts such as this, which are so good you couldn't pass it up. Online anonymity makes it easier for traffickers to operate without fear of being caught, but victims themselves don't have this same benefit. We have seen some survivors of domestic servitude in the Gulf, for example, caution others in the comments of posts to be wary about posting about their forced labour experiences out of fear of being monitored by their abusers or employers. So we will be releasing a report and campaigning on this topic in the year to come, but please do get in touch and let us know how this intersects with your work. We would welcome digital rights activists in the region like yourselves to get involved, and so please stay across our research as it develops. And that brings me to the end of my lightning talk. If you would like to discuss any of this in more detail, as I've said before, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Our info email and my direct email is listed on this slide, and I've also commented them in the chat. You can stay updated on our research by following us on social media. And importantly, please keep an eye out for the next Global Slavery Index, for all this and more, including an updated breakdown of how many people live in modern slavery at a country level, will be reported. So that is all from me. Shukran, Basim Araba, thank you so much for listening. Please do keep in touch, and to the organisers, congratulations on such an excellent event, and I will stop sharing my screen now. Thank you all. I'm not sure if there's any questions, but I'm happy to stay on the line if there are.
Hi, I don't think, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My name is Jaberzen. I'm an activist. I really work on the region, but mainly on Libya. Are you guys working on Libya, and are you aware of all the complicated situation for immigrants and workers in Libya and the modern day slavery that is happening over there? And in the categories of slavery, I didn't see, maybe I missed it, prisoners type of slavery or forced labor, where prisoners are kidnapped or enforced disappeared people in Libya are forced to work for the militias that kidnap them, or for the security institutions that kidnap them or imprison them. And if you are not working on Libya, how can we make that happen? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So in terms of working on Libya, we work on a global basis. Libya, I believe, is one of the countries captured by the Global Slavery Index. So we assess Libya in terms of its government response, its vulnerability to modern slavery, and prevalence. At this stage, we don't have any specific programs in Libya, but we're always open to discussing that in more detail. Please feel free to get in touch with me. I can connect you with my colleagues. And in terms of the definitions of modern slavery, prison labor is an interesting topic. To become a situation of forced labor, it needs to have the essential elements of involuntary work that is delivered under the menace of penalty. But in terms of prison labor, where prisoners are required to work as punishment for political activism, for example, it can become state-imposed forced labor. And we do capture state-imposed forced labor in the global estimates. So that's a bit of a grey area.
I just want to add that, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to add that these people are not imprisoned legally in legal prisons. These people can be kidnapped from the streets, or different type of situations. I don't know if you are aware of what's happening in Libya, where there are many militias that kidnap people, and mainly foreigners. And during their stay, which is not prison actually, it's kind of enforced disappearances and kidnapping for many reasons, including the security institutions, the internal security and militias that work with the government, that have legal mandate with the government, but they don't function legally. So they put people in secret prisons actually, but during their imprisonment, they take them to work, all kind of labor. I saw this with my own eyes while I spent my own time in enforced disappearance. So the Libyan government will not cooperate because it's part of the government. These people are part of the government actually, in one way or another, because it's a very complicated situation over there where militias and the government are sleeping in the same bed. So they are not prisoners. It's not legal punishment. They are forced labor and prisoners and kidnapped people. So they are suffering in both sides of the world, like being imprisoned and being forced laborers. And they can't do anything about it. They get beaten up. They work from the day until night. I saw this with my own eyes for a month. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to hear more from you and to link you with my colleagues where relevant. But yes, that does sound like it is a situation tending towards forced labor. We need to understand more about the context, but it does sound, from as you've described, to be that. Are there any other questions in the room or online? If not,
So no more questions.
no? Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much. If there is any other questions, please feel free to get in touch with me on my email and follow us on socials, and we will be releasing the next Global Slavery Index before I can believe it. But thank you all so much.